Raskievicz is kind of a Eastern European name. I'm outraged. For instance, you look at our brother Barack Obama, and I'll even call my brother Donald Trump. Both of them, Trey, want to spend 60%. You would think these guys would be different, but both of them want to spend 60% of our discretionary budget on foreign policy, on killing other people, basically. We know since World War II, the vast majority of people who've died from American bombs and bullets have been civilians in both ruling class parties. Now, I have great respect for the intelligence and articulate nature of Barack Obama, but I don't have respect for him spending 60% of our discretionary budget, or 59, I think it was, 58. I rounded up there a little bit, on the military, Trey. Now, I've said it before and have written about it before. If somehow the American military was a force for good and democracy, then we could maybe justify that spending. But sadly, and I don't mean anything against the troops, because a lot of these people have no choice but to join the military, but we go into countries, Trey, where we're not wanted. We mistreat their people. We bomb their people, and again, most of them, it's innocent civilians. And I have a very hard time with violence anyway. And again, that's one of the great reasons I love the Green Party, because we have a policy of nonviolence, Trey. Again, let me emphasize, I do believe in self-defense, but most of our military actions, obviously, especially since the end of World War II, had nothing or almost nothing to do with national defense. It had everything to do with corporate war profiteering. It had to do with geopolitical advantage. And most of all, it had to do with going in and take the natural resources of poor countries, paying off their dictators so we can take their natural resources. And that's really our military has propped up that type of action. And even some generals will admit that. Even during the Bush administration, I think it was Cheney who said, hey, I wish we could just tell the American people that we're going in the Middle East to take their oil. But of course, that's not politically a viable reason to support military spending, to say we're going to go take people's oil.
So the budget, I think, is like 700 billion, maybe $1 trillion.
Right.
Military spending under Trump administration. What would if you were in the Senate, what kind of budget checks would you, or what type of legislation would you introduce?
Well, it has to be dramatically reduced. I think we could easily, Trey, and then, like anything, even if it's a good idea, sometimes you have to ease into it a little bit. But I think easily within a couple of years, we could reduce that by a third, and then in a couple more years by half. And within the end of my 6-year term, I'd like to see it reduced by 2/3. And first of all, Trey, we can do that by eliminating war profiteering. Violence to me is a very inexcusable human behavior, and it's even more inexcusable when it's organized on a mass scale, and it's even more inexcusable when the main reason of that military violence is war profiteering, or to allow corporations to go in and make huge profits. So I would dramatically reduce the military budget, but first by eliminating war profiteering, and then by looking at a keyword that's come up during this pandemic: essential. What is essential military spending? And we find over and over again a lot of military spending that's not needed at all. The reason we have such a high level of spending with the military, Trey, it gets back to the Republican and Democratic goal. Their main goal in life, Trey, which is so sad to me, so unfortunate, their main goal is, how can we make people that already have more than enough wealth for dozens of lifetimes or hundreds of lifetimes, how can we make more money for them? That is the primary goal of the Republican and Democratic Party. To me, that is inexcusable. And of course, one way they do it is, hey, let's do a lot of military spending, a lot of pork spending in military. In fact, there's an interesting story from a couple of years ago. The Department of Defense, I may not have I have the numbers at home, but I think it's something like they spent $200 million to audit their books. And they employed, I think it was 1,200 auditors. They took over a couple of years to do it. And the auditors came back to the Department of Defense and said, well, really, we can't make any sense of your budget. That makes no sense. You're just plugging in random numbers here and there. And